Welcome to the Ed Gap Evolution Podcast. I'm your host, Mariah Phillips. You can call me Mariah because that's my name, and I'm thrilled to have you on this journey with me and all of the spectacular guests who jump on the podcast to give you more options for educating children so that children have more options for building a magnificent future. The Ed Gap Evolution Podcast is a digital community where parents, educators, and innovators drop the details on how they are using their lives to help children explore the vastness of education beyond the textbook so that we can close America's education gap together. And just in case you didn't get the memo, producing a podcast is a whole lot of work. We're talking schedule coordination, production, the list goes on and on. So in return for bringing you this show every week, we just ask that you always find a way to share and use what you learn on the podcast to enrich children and families everywhere. Alrighty, without further ado, come along with me to meet our very next guest. We are interviewing Reginald Ryder. So the story around how Reg and I met is really interesting. Life can be so cool, guys, because I've known Reg since 2016. We worked at the same ed tech company for almost 3 years. I was there for 3 years. He's been there much longer. He's a dedicated guy. And I had no idea that we would reconnect due to the great work that Reg is doing for students and families through his coaching business, Thriving Life Coaching, which we'll talk about in just a bit. And Reg, I'm so grateful to have you here today to dig into your story as a first-generation college student and really put on display just how you've used your life experiences to equip recent high school grads and college students everywhere with the necessary support for reaching their fullest potential. So, Reg, how are you doing today?
I am doing great, and so good to catch up with you again, Mariah. You're right. We did have a cult following from a few years back when we when we worked together, but it's really good to be on with you and to talk about Thriving Life Coaching and beyond.
Yeah. No, when I first started, I was the job we worked at, they had like a lot of snacks. And to get to the cereal part, I would have to go through Reg's department. And so I was sitting there like, oh, hey, just random. Never thought we'd end up on a podcast together. So this is great.
You and me both. I'm telling you, it's an amazing turn of events, but I'm glad that we've come in each other's company.
Yeah. So Reg, I want to clear the air a little bit for people who... So coaching can be such a buzzword nowadays.
Fair.
When it comes to coaching it's kind of easy for us to imagine coaching on the field when we talk about football. The coach is helping you develop your skills, teaching you the game, all those sorts of things. And then when we get to coaching as far as like a life coach or online, you have some people who call themselves a coach and they run an Instagram account. They never really talk to people. It's like, hey, I'm the coach on Instagram who coaches you about XYZ. Then you have folks who are coaches and they have courses and like, hey, take my course and I'll coach you on this. And then there are coaches like you. And so could you talk to us from your perspective before we jump into your history and everything, just so we're all clear, what's a coach in your opinion and why do coaches matter to the work that you do?
Well, good. And that's actually a good question. And it's funny, you talked about the sports analogy. I actually have been a basketball coach in my life. I used to coach girls in high school. So it's that part of it's kind of near and dear to my heart. So I actually kind of use a coaching analogy with respect to that to talk about what coaching really is. Coaching, much like in a sport, is someone who knows and understands the kind of game or level of game with all the expectations, the bells and whistles, the nuts and bolts that go along with it. As a coach, you really put yourself in the position to, be that expert and that person who knows the game well enough inside and out that you can begin to kind of anticipate and expect either the things that should happen or need to happen or things that you don't want to happen in one respect or another. Much like a coach in sporting analogy, you can offer all the training, you can offer all the support, you can offer all those things in regard to that. But ultimately, what it comes down to is putting that person out in the field or on the floor, whatever the case may be, and watching them work. 9 times out of 10, they're doing most of the things mechanically that they need to do, whether it's dribbling, whether it's shooting, whether I'm using basketball because that's kind of near and dear to me. In that regard, to help them meet the mark. But like anything, there's always pressure points within the context of a game. And so you have to kind of know how to respond to it. As a coach, you don't want to get too high or too low, get them excited or get them rattled, but you want to kind of give them the layout so they can kind of see it. And then given their mistakes or their milestones, you have them either repeat them or minimize them as much as they possibly can so that they can perform their game at their best ability. For me as an academic coach and readiness coach, I try and put students in the position to say that if you clearly don't make the mistakes that I made along the way and put yourself in a position where you're open and receptive to all that I'm going to be offering you about, not just how to get through school productively, but really through life, you'll go far and you'll do great things. And so coaching to me really relates back to understanding, who it is that you're working with, the playing field that they're on in whatever context that may mean, and allowing a student to be able to work from their strengths so that they are able to maximize their potential, much like you talked about in your introduction.
Wow, that's excellent. I've never been a coach in any capacity. I've always been the player, the one. I played basketball in high school. I'm not a runner, and so having a coach was really did, like you said, provide that emotional stability. Like put your head in it, but kind of take your emotions out of it. Yes. And I never thought of it from the perspective of helping the person get their head in it, pertaining to like whatever field that they're in, because that must be a really important element. Not just providing a wide scope view of how to do something, but really focusing in on what that particular specialty or what that particular goal is for the person.
Right. And it's interesting because I think people don't necessarily, I know, kind of old school, we would have called it just counseling or advising or mentoring, but I think it goes a step further than that because much like you talked about in your kind of introduction, some people call themselves a coach and they, say, watch my webinar and that's it. No, my coaching is really on the ground, one-on-one, in your face in a good way. But, right there with you along the way as you move through the process. And it's an amazing experience to do and to really capture in some respects. And I learn just as much as I think the students do as well, because, clearly everyone doesn't approach this, process, from the same perspective, the same prism. And so you kind of have to help shape that in one respect or another. So it's been a great experience with the students that I coach right now, to see them bud and blossom and really emerge in all the ways that they have.
That's excellent. And speaking of, budding and blossoming, moving along, let's move along into getting to know you a bit more. So we'll jump into your education in just a bit. And I don't want to spoil the fun that's coming up as far as your work experience, but can you tell us where you're from, Reg, and what motivates you to spring out of the bed each day and get going?
Okay, sure. So I'm from Indiana. That's where my home state, but I offer that as a caveat because my father was in the Air Force, so I've kind of bounced around a lot. I was, believe it or not, my birthplace is actually Rapid City, South Dakota.
Nice.
Yeah, but I've lived in South Dakota. I've lived in Georgia. I've lived in Oregon. I lived in Indiana. And then so undergraduate is where I did my work at Ball State University in Indiana. And then from there, on my own, I went to Pennsylvania twice, Virginia twice, which is where I currently live, just outside of Dulles Airport, around that area, and New York twice. So I've seen a bit of the world, to say the least.
Also, so Reg is a national and an international guy, guys. He's almost seen it all.
Almost.
And so, what do you think that it was? Do you think that it's the fact that you have lived so many places and had so many experiences with so many different types of people that propelled you to get into the coaching business? What was it that made, because I've, in both of the positions we were at our old job, we had to talk to a lot of people all the time. And for some people that can be really overwhelming, really stressful, so many things. So what do you think it is that made you go into a profession where you are in such direct contact with folks, their emotions and their lives all the time? Is that what sends you springing out of bed, or is it something else?
Well, it is that. It is I think the opportunity to help shape, I say people's lives, but really an experience, and whatever experience that may mean for them, to get them, ultimately to where they want to go. So that's really what gets me up and out of bed. It's funny. As I think about it even now, people have always kind of, well, let me back up actually. Because I've lived in so many different places, you have to really kind of hit the ground running and really kind of transition yourself into a new place. By the time I was 10, I think I'd moved 4 times, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's right. I think four or 5 times, and gone to probably 4 or 5 schools in that time frame as well. There's really no time to be a wallflower, and I was fairly athletic, and I've been fairly outgoing and that kind of thing, and so people kind of gravitated towards me. And so as I got older, it turned out that people would come to me with their, issues or their concerns or a question that they had. And 9 times out of 10, I would offer, kind of armchair psychology as a, 6th, 7th, 8th grader, not only maybe not the best advice, but it was at least right advice. And they took it and they kind of ran with it, and it worked. And so that kind of resonated. By the time I got to college, I became a resident assistant. And so that's kind of a gravitational pull for, being resourceful and knowing information and resources about the campus that I was on when I was an RA. And then that really, that position itself, along with some other things that I did, really kind of dovetailed me from wanting to be a lawyer, which is what I thought I wanted to be when I grew up at some point, to actually working in higher education. And by getting to higher education, once I got there, I realized that there was a lot that I didn't know as a first generation student. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but I wanted to make sure that the students that I worked with from that point on had the information that I didn't have. And it's not that my parents didn't give it to me because they, blocked it or held it from me, but they did not go to college themselves. And so by default, there was only so much that they could give me in that regard, in the way of, love and support, which I got, but not the kind of nuts and bolts of how to be successful in that particular arena. So that's where it really kind of all spawned from. And it's just kind of grown and developed and emerged from there to where I am right now.
So basically you're the Warren Buffett of counseling. You started
I don't have quite the price tag behind the number of zeros behind my name as I'd like, but
he started at 7-8. You started at 7-8.
Okay. So well, look, I'll take that, and you speaking that into my existence means that there's a chance for me yet. So I'll take
it. Absolutely. So you've had so many exceptional experiences in education and in your life. I mean, you earned your bachelor's of political science from Ball State University. You went to James Madison University for your master's of education in counseling and psychology, right?
Correct.
Okay. And you held so many different roles where you were a leader or a coach, and like I said, directly impacted people's ability to thrive. And so right now we're going to play a bit of a game. So on your website, I'll tell folks how to get to your website towards the end of this episode, but you list about 8 places of employment. I'm going to read off just 4 different ones.
Okay.
And you have the option to say pass, but you'll tell us in 1 sentence your favorite part about serving in that role. Okay.
That's fair. Okay. That's good. I like this game.
Okay. So the first one is Cornell University Director of Multicultural Student Services.
That experience finally helped me overcome my own imposter syndrome.
Awesome. So what, I forgot to add this part. I get to ask questions back.
Okay.
So
that's fair.
What did your imposter syndrome look or feel like? And what was that pivotal moment where you said, "Hey, I'm over this. Like I've moved on to the next level, or I've gotten past that." Got it.
So if you know anything about Cornell University, it's an Ivy League institution. It's a great institution in upstate New York. And for me, I was just finishing graduate school. So I just finished graduate school, and I was going to work there as their director of multicultural student services. if you know anything about Cornell, you know that they're basically, it's an Ivy League institution, but it's also a cream of the crop. And the top-notch students, go there. Very smart, very savvy, you name it. They're the answer key to your, public school or private school setting if you were in high school. Now, little old me from, an Air Force background, that's my dad was in the Air Force, from a public school to public school institutions that I went to for college, I'm thinking, what in the world can I possibly teach these students that they don't already know already? But what I realized and what helped me get over it was that at that point I was pretty seasoned in my own age, but realized that they were still, teenagers and still, 18, 19, years old, 17 in some respects, year old students who had no life experience and who had not been, kind of walked the same walk that I had walked in some respects. And so once I realized that, to hear them talk and to hear them make some of the either excuses or the mistakes that they were making, I was like, okay, this all makes sense to me now. I know what or how to move forward with that. And being able to provide them with the insight and perspective that they needed. And so I kind of went from there, but it took that moment in being in that particular setting for me to realize that what I had in the way of capacity was a lot more bandwidth than I gave myself credit for.
Wow. And I think that, I can imagine that the students were very grateful because 17, 18 years old. I mean, I remember when I was that age in college, I was not at Cornell for the record. But I was that age before. And right. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing besides going to school and trying to pass. And so,
and sometimes didn't even go to school,
right.
If you made that choice, but yes, you're right. That's very much, what I learned and realized about that experience.
That's fantastic. And so 2, Butler University Assistant Director of Admissions.
That was the first time I really had a chance or an opportunity to really be in a influential position to help shape the lives of students. Part of my role was that I had a scholarship a full ride scholarship for 5 African-American students that I could award each year that I was there. And along the way, met some amazing people and some amazing students, and actually have several, but key pivotal stories related to that really speak to that experience.
So I have a question about, you mentioned that in that role that you awarded scholarships. And I don't know the whole world of awarding scholarships. So if there's anything confidential, feel free not to say it. But on TikTok and a lot of different social media apps, there are so many people or college students or high school students looking for advice. They look up these scholarships, and once they get to the application or the essay part, their brain goes blank. Like people are like, what do I do? So do you have any advice for how one should approach how you should be thinking when you apply for a scholarship? Is it about being unique? Is it about fitting in? What is it?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, in some respects, some of these scholarships are, have a specific essay requirement related to it. So, clearly make sure you follow the directions in that regard. But beyond that, I would actually say just be your true, authentic self, and literally, tell your story. I mean, I think we all have a story that's in us, and have had some, what would I call them, kind of key or pivotal moments that have kind of helped us steer in one direction or another. I think that's really important for people to be able to do. This wasn't an essay related to a scholarship, but I had one of my former students was a niece of a very famous person, but had no real ties to that individual. But she talked about seeing her lives through the stardom of her aunt in this particular case, but not really being able to receive the kind of benefits or residuals that came from that whole experience. But she explained all this in the context of her essay, and then at the very end, she told me, or told us and the those who were reading it, who she was related to. And it was just like, you read it, it's just like, oh, wow. I mean, I felt like I knew this person after what she had offered in regard to that. So it was a pretty amazing experience. And so I think, as I think about that essay, that was a unique way of her being able to talk about her experience. And that was what she used for her application for the admissions process. But to this day, that story still sticks and resonates with me. So it is you being unique, but it is you also, I think, being true and authentic to who you are and what you'd like to become or be. And, and talk about it in the context of how the scholarship will, be a benefit to you in that regard.
That's interesting because, like you're saying, she could have gone the route of saying, this is who my aunt is. And because of that, you should pick me. Exactly. Or I could imagine that if people do know that she's related to her aunt at any point in her life, that she's had to overcome the whole thing of, oh, you're the niece of XYZ.
Right.
And so in this regard for this scholarship, she was her own person, and she harnessed her story and it worked out for her, I would assume. So
yep, it did. She ended up going to finish her Cornell degree as an undergrad, went to law school, and she's a lawyer now in California.
Isn't that sweet? Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so number 3 is Westtown School Assistant Dean of Students.
That was actually interesting experience, because at that point I'll put it this way, I don't think I was living my best life from the standpoint of the kind of work that I was doing. I was doing kind of all the things that I'm doing now, but I was stretched thin given the kind of experience that I had at the school.
Gotcha.
It's a day in boarding school. And so in that context, my role was as a different role than I previously had ever served. But I was the person, when the student got in trouble, they came to see the assistant dean. And so that was me. And so I either took them through a discipline process, which meant sometimes they got suspended or sometimes even expelled. Or, we had lots of kind of, come to Jesus moments where they, needed to kind of hear something. And so the thing that I think I remember most about that experience is that, and I remember saying this to students very often, is that, it's not the mistake that you make, it's the milestones you make after it that really make the difference, versus just everyone being caught in the moment of what that mistake was. Wow. And I think we do that kind of in general as people. We look at the mistake and say, oh God, they did this, or oh gosh, they did that, and not what happens after that. Because hopefully there's a gap in between where you learn the lesson, you've kind of inoculated yourself with the new purposeful person that kind of emerges from it, and how you emerge from that really makes the difference.
Yeah, and that would ring especially true for kids and young adults, because they have so much life to live. Essentially, this is a mistake, and it might seem like a terrible mistake now, but hey, there are many more quote unquote mistakes to come.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's not that you can't make mistakes, but clearly there's some mistakes that you can or shouldn't make. They have, repercussions in, lots of different ways that sometimes you can or don't recover from. Even those situations are ones that you can still, bounce back from in one respect or another. But typically the ones that, these, young teenagers were making at this day in boarding school were things that, they could, bounce back from. And, whenever I saw them, if they started, to drop their head because they saw me coming, go to them, directly in the face and tell them, lift their head up and say hello and engage them in conversation, whatever the case may be. So that's what I think gained from that experience and that exposure.
That's great. And so the final one is 2U Senior Student Success Specialist.
Oh, wow. Well, that's what I currently do right now. I work with, in partnership with University of Southern California's School of Ed. There's a organizational change and leadership program, an EDD program that students are in. They're in it for 3 years, and my role is working with them from orientation to graduation. And believe it or not, and this is part of what even kind of inspired me to actually do this business, is that business that I'm in right now, is that as leaders in this particular program, they go through imposter syndrome as well. They sometimes doubt their skills and doubt their talents, even though they're leaders in their organizations, and supervise and train or work with hundreds and thousands of people, and work with millions of dollars at a time. Everyone, I think, kind of goes through that process in one respect or another. And so that imposter syndrome, when it happens for them, makes them feel like because someone else is doing so much or has done so much, not like themselves, but done so much, that they don't measure up. And one of the first things I tell the students that I work with is that, when you get into class and you start talking about the books and the theories and stuff like that you're reading, be sure and apply them back to the work that you do in your daily life, because whether you realize it or not, something that you say is going to spark something for somebody else who in fact may be needing that very thing that you have. And I was just before we came on today, I talked with one of my students who talked about having that imposter syndrome, but now he's, on his own kind of individual quest to have one of the top 5 dissertations that he can produce.
That's amazing.
And so, given where he started and feeling that imposter syndrome for maybe a semester or two, to now being in a place where he feels confident and wants to be the leader of the pack, I think says, clearly a lot about his character, but also says a lot about the kind of experience and exposure that he's had, not just to me, but to other people who have clearly poured into him enough to say, this is something that you can do and that you're capable of doing.
Yes. And Reg, I just think it's so amazing. The scope of your experience, and of your capabilities is so rich and well-rounded, K through 12, all the way up to higher ed, Master of Education programs, things like that. And so
Thank you.
I wonder about your support system. That's a lot to take on, and you have years of experience with it. And I know that your family means a lot to you, and you attribute a lot of your success or your support to your wife. And
Yes.
So, why is that? What does that look like to have a healthy relationship with a partner or other members of your family? What does your support system look like? And how important do you believe it is for a coach to have someone in your corner as well?
It's a very good question. And trust me, my wife and my family remind me of that all the time. Because I tend to be, and especially when I'm what I call my passion project or passion projects, I get, fully inundated. I won't say I don't sleep. That would be not exactly right, but I put a lot of time into it. And sometimes I put so much time into it that you kind of, can kind of silo yourself and put yourself in that space where, no one else can kind of get in. So to give you a little background, my wife and I actually this coming Monday will be married 25 years.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. So she's clearly been there for me in lots of ways. And, and I as much as you hear or maybe even perceive that I've got it all together, trust me, I'm a work in progress as well. And if I had her on to tell you that, she would probably say the very same thing as well. So, I think I've got something that I think that's a commodity that people want, but I'm still, again, a work in progress. So I don't think it's ever a done deal. You can always be a lifelong learner. So maybe that's the first thing I would say. But really beyond that, I teasingly kind of call her my CFO and my editor in chief and kind of lots of titles like that, because she does help me in that regard. But, we have a good, healthy relationship. We don't always see eye to eye, and, sometimes we disagree, and, I think that's life. But behind it all, she has a very much a servant's heart. I much the same, I think, have a servant's heart as well. I'm one of 5 kids. I'm a twin. I don't know if you knew that or not, Mariah. But
I didn't. Oh my goodness! So you guys are identical?
I know. I have a twin sister.
Okay.
But but I'm the youngest. We're the youngest of the group, and I'm the most youngest, I guess is the best way to put it. I'm
By
the
how many
youngest of the family.
seconds, minutes?
It's actually 5. It's actually 5 minutes, and believe it or not, we were almost born on a different day just because it was so close to midnight.
Whoa, that's cool.
But it all worked out. Yeah, it's my brothers and sisters were and are, I should say, my best friends when we were kids, because you really don't, when for as much as we moved around, you don't really get a chance to kind of establish roots and a sense of kind of what's going on and what's happening with the people that you're hanging with. And so we kind of became each other's good friends. To this day, we are still practically like we were when we were teenagers and kids. But I attribute that to my parents, because my parents have been married in August, will be 65 years. So I've seen in some respects, how they have worked and operated, in my life, and obviously in their life, long before me. And, the hard work and the dedication that they put into to us, in general. And it doesn't say we always got it right and that we always did what they wanted, or that we went in the directions that they wanted. But the bottom line is that we had at least an example to work from. And so kind of all that related back to coaching, to me, coaching and, parenting and everything else is really about leaving a legacy of one sort or another, as much and as best you possibly can. With clearly examples that work, that, get you, the kind of productivity that you want, but also, being vulnerable enough to make mistakes and to learn from them. And so, that's my support system. Plus I have a great group of friends and colleagues as well.
It sounds like clearly your tribe provides a lot of TLC, tender loving care.
Yes, indeed.
And there's a perfect segue into what we're going to talk about next. I know that with your business, Thriving Life Coaching, you say every student needs a little TLC.
Correct.
And so we're going to zoom in on your business and on the services that you offer, because this is an excellent resource that I would love. We talk a lot on this show about K through 5 students. And so this is really the first time we're diving into a service for folks who are emerging, entering college, fresh out of high school. So could you tell us, Reg, what is the company doing for students and families? What do your services look like?
Right. So you're right. It is Thriving Life Coaching, and I was very deliberate with that title. I didn't want something that was going to give anyone a sense that they were just kind of just going to get by. I wanted it to be thriving versus survival, because there's clearly a different mindset in that regard. But Thriving Life Coaching, what it does is it provides students with individualized coaching, or if it's an organization, with a more kind of global sense of how a student can become as productive as they possibly can. So we look at things like, students' strengths and kind of, ultimately kind of the pulse of where they are at that particular moment. Amongst things that I do in relationship to that, to kind of get a sense of what the student is like, is that I do a 15-minute free consultation with families, just so I can kind of explain who I am, what my services are, and find out a little bit about what they're in need of. If it's a mutually agreed upon situation from that point on, then we move forward with the coaching process, and I start with an initial assessment. That initial assessment is basically a chance for me to get to know the student better. I do that independent of the parents, because I want to know the student for who the student is, not for who the student should be in front of their parents. I want them to know kind of who they authentically are. We spend a lot of time talking about kind of where they are in school, what they're like outside of school, what their hobbies and interests are, what their strengths are. And then we really kind of get to the nitty gritty of it, and talking about what the coaching piece, with talking about what their goals are. And then I go one step further than just kind of knowing what those goals are. But I have the student actually, because I want the student to be very much in charge of what goes on and what happens in this context and within this process. I have students actually assign themselves tasks and I simply become their accountability partner. So you talk about that coaching at the very beginning, that's what that really boils down to. So once they tell me what it is that they're after and what they want and the kind of commitment and level of work that they want to pin in, my job is then to basically just make sure that they do so. We usually meet every couple of weeks or at least monthly, depending on the situation or circumstances. I'll check in with them to find out how things are going over a Zoom call, typically over the platform. In doing so, we talk about the kind of, how the day was, how the week was, how things are gone. If they have been given assignments or things that they're working on or tasks that they've been told to work on, then that's part of what we do. As part of every meeting, I give a student and the parent, because I copied on the parents as well, a summary of what we talked about, summary of what things need to be done, or ways of being able to approach their work. We do it in context with high school. I can coach as young as middle school, but really high school and college students are primarily the clients, at least that I have at the moment. The services are available over Zoom, and it kind of works from there. So that's what I do with individuals. With organizations, I do things like boot camps, so to speak, where it's like a session to talk about, getting ready for college or what things you should be doing in preparation for college, especially if you're in high school. If you're getting ready for college and, learning and finding out what that process is like and what things you should be ready to take on or anticipate, and strategies and tips to work from there. That's pretty much it in a workshop. I'm in a nutshell, I should say. I'm actually in the process right now of working on a few other projects that are related to the coaching piece, with some written material that I'm working on, and hopefully that will come about in the summer. Hopefully, be ready for fall.
Wow,
but that's what thriving life coaching is.
That's a world of resources. And I really appreciate what you said when you were talking about the one-on-one coaching. As far as having the students create their own tasks, and really have a say in the process. Because I remember when I was younger, my aunt, she cares a whole lot, and she's a part of a very popular sorority, which will remain unnamed.
Okay.
And so they did a lot of work of, we're from Baltimore City. So they did a lot of work of making sure that students stayed the course. They had a lot of Saturday coaching, quote unquote, coaching programs or mentorship programs. And I just remember me and all of the other kids and teenagers who were there just like slumped over the chair because we were just being delegated all of these things. And like nobody really took the time to find out if the things that they were delegating mattered to our lives and stories, or if we comprehended why we were doing those things.
Right.
And so now that you say that, I can definitely see where the missing chink in their armor was, and how your program is really building that student up and having them involved in the process, and how that can make a difference.
Yeah, because and it's really true. One of the things that I want to make sure students understand, not just about the process with myself, but just the process that they go through in general, and it applies to school, but it applies to kind of life outside of school as well. Is that you're my client, and so it's my job to make you better. If what I do doesn't make you better, then you should talk to someone else who's gonna put you in that position to be able to be at your best. But if what I'm offering you and providing for you is in fact that, then this isn't some people say marriage is a 50-50 partnership, and it's like, no, it's really not. It's your 100% that you're bringing as bride, and it's your 100% you bring as groom, and you're pulling those two things together and giving it your all. Now, sometimes it doesn't work out. It should, but doesn't work out. But it's not because you're not putting in the full level of work to make sure that it happens. And so my quest is to really make sure that that's what I get students to be able to do.
I hope you've enjoyed part 1 of this episode. To listen to the second half, head to the show's feed and download part 2. But before you do, remember, I'm a one-woman team producing this podcast every week. That means finding guests, planning out each episode, editing the audio, and even promo. Wow is absolutely right. Wow, bringing you this show every week is absolutely a pleasure, always, but it does require hard work and resources. So if you enjoy the podcast and want to support me in keeping this show going, you absolutely can. Here are 4 great ways to support the show today. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can rate the podcast and leave a review directly on Apple Podcasts or the Podbean app if you're an Androider. When you do this, your review helps more people find and listen to the show, which means more kids get the resources that they need to thrive, and isn't that the goal? You can share your favorite episode on your social media, with your colleagues, and with everyone you know. And number 4, you can support the Ed Gap Evolution podcast monetarily by purchasing inspiring apparel for kids and adults on our website, edgapevolution.com. Okay, don't forget to listen to part 2 of this episode with Reginald Ryder of Thriving Life Coaching. And thank you so much.